Hello, and welcome to Chapter 18, Part A of the Cardiovascular System. This is Professor Queen, and I will be discussing today the heart anatomy. This video is also going to be very useful in your lab. So if you have any problems with the lab, try to look into this video, and maybe the answer to your questions will be in this video. Otherwise, there are also other references which I have included in your lab, in all of your labs, so you can take a look at the readings in the OpenStax, your readings in your ebook, and this video. Let's start. The heart is a transport system of the cardiovascular system and consists of two side-by-side pumps. And you could see that there's actually two tubes that are connected to the heart. This is your heart right there in the center. You have a red tube, which is actually a representation of the arterial system. And then you have a blue tube, which is a representation of the venous system. The right side receives oxygen poor. So this is the right side of the body. It doesn't look like it's the right side. You are looking at it and it looks like it is the left, right? It is your left when you are actually looking at it. Well, from now from the very beginning, when you were in AP1, you were already trained to look at a model like a mirror image of yourself. Therefore, you're on the right side of the model, you're actually feeling it, and you are feeling the right side of the model. It is actually in a mirror reflection of your left. So you look at it as if it was your left. No, it's not your left. It is not the left side of the uh, it is not the left side of the model, it's actually the right side of the model. And so we have here the model of the heart with the connecting blood vessels. The right side of the heart is the blue side. This is actually your blue part. The left side of the model is actually the one that's colored red. So the right side receives oxygen poor blood from the tissues right there. It pumps blood to the lungs. There's actually your lungs. It pumps blood to the lungs to get rid of carbon dioxide and pick up oxygen via what you call the pulmonary circuit. After going through the pulmonary circuit, you're going to inhale oxygen, you pick up the oxygen, and then the blood turns red. And the oxygenated blood from the lungs will now pump blood from the lungs back into the heart, and from the heart again it moves via the left side of the heart, the aorta, into the different parts of the body. Now you have your arterial blood, oxygen poor blood being delivered back to the tissues. And in your tissues, again, you're now going to be using up those oxygen and those nutrients. And the capillaries and the venous system is now going to deliver it back into the heart to be pumped again into the lungs and to be oxygenated. So it goes around and around in a circuit. That is only in a nutshell. So let's take a look in depth at the heart anatomy. The heart anatomy have receiving chambers and pumping chambers. So chambers. So that means you have two receiving chambers and two pumping chambers. So there are four chambers in the heart. And you can see the chambers in the heart here. You have the right side of the heart. On the superior end of the heart, you have a receiving chamber, which is your atria. And then you have your pumping chamber, which is the ventricle. So you have atrium and a ventricle on the right side, and they both carry oxygen poor blood. Then you have on the left side of the heart, you have a pumping chamber, which is actually below. This is actually your ventricle, and then a receiving chamber, which is the atrium, the left atrium. So you have two receiving chambers, and these are the atria. The right atrium receives blood returning from the systemic circuit, and therefore this blood is actually oxygen poor. the left atrium receives blood from the pulmonary circuit, and therefore this is actually oxygen rich blood. And the pumping chamber of the heart, the right ventricle, this is the right ventricle, pumps blood through the pulmonary circuit. So this is actually the one that delivers oxygen poor blood into the pulmonary circuit so it can be oxygenated. Then the left ventricle, on the other hand, has already received from the atria, the left atria, the oxygen rich blood. And once it contracts, it's going to pump blood through the systemic circuit. So it's going to go back, it's going to deliver the blood back into the tissues. So where do you find the heart? Well, you know already where the heart is. You've been in love, you always touch the middle of your chest. So it's right there in the middle of your chest. It's not on the left side of your chest. It's not on the right side of the chest. It's right there in the middle, right there by your sternum, okay, and behind the sternum. As a matter of fact, that sternum is actually heavy so that it can be protecting your chest. That chest bone is very heavy, so it can be protecting your heart. So the medial line is called the media or the mid-sternal line. And that's where we get the word mediastinum, the middle of the sternum. Behind that is that you have the sternum right there. Behind that is actually where you find the heart in its own small cage in the mediastinum. It is actually anatomically in the middle of the chest cavity, and the chest cavity is actually the um, the thoracic cavity, and you have your right and your left lung right in there. In the middle, sandwiched between your right and left lung, you have a middle that's a middle an organ that is caged um, um, by its own cover, and it is actually our pumping organ, the heart. This is actually your mediastinum. You could see this is it is a transverse section of the body itself, right there by the T8 vertebrae, and you could see the heart. You have the left lung and you have the right lung. The heart's covering, first of all, is actually pericardium. It's a double-walled sac that surrounds the heart. It's made up of two layers. The first layer is the superficial fibrous pericardium. It functions to protect, to anchor the heart to the surrounding structure, and prevents overfilling. um, deep into the two-layered serum, deep into this is actually deep into the pericardium is actually the serous pericardium. It is the parietal layer. It lines the internal surface of the fibrous pericardium, and it will have also the visceral layer, which is the epicardium, on the external surface, going into the external over the external surface of the heart. These two layers are separated by a fluid in between, which is in the pericardial cavity. That fluid pretty much prevents your heart, which is constantly moving for the rest of your life from the time you were born until the time that you're going to die, is actually moving. It non-stop. Your heart will not stop until you're just dead. Now, these two layers will separate, which is separated by fluid, by in the pericardial cavity. The fluid itself is actually rich in hyaluronic acid. It is very slimy, and it allows the heart to move without friction. And right here, pretty much I will explain to you exactly where those things are that I mentioned in the previous page. Pretty much you have your fibrous pericardium. This is actually, well, first of all, this is the heart. This area here is the heart. This is the muscle of the heart, a myocardium. This is the inner membrane of the heart, which you call the endocardium. This is the chamber. And I don't know if it is actually your um, which chamber is it? Is it actually your ventricle or is it your atrium? And and pretty much this is actually myocardium, which is a muscle, Then the outside cover is called the epicardium or the visceral layer of the serous pericardium. The serous pericardium is this. Follow my thing, and there. That is actually your serous pericardium. It has two parts. The first part is the one that is covering the heart. You call it the epicardium, and the other one goes with a flap of fibrous pericardium. So it is on the underside of the fibrous pericardium. This is actually what's called the parietal layer or of the serous pericardium. So both the parietal layer of the serous pericardium and the fibrous pericardium covers the heart, okay? Covers the heart like this, and it goes out and would anchor itself to the diaphragm. This is actually your fibrous pericardium. This anchors itself to the diaphragm so that even if you're doing a somersault, your heart is not going to fall back into your throat. It stays there. It moves. Even if you're dancing and if you are actually doing the cartwheel, your heart stays the way it is. Cardiac tamponade. And I'm pretty sure you've seen Grey's Anatomy. You've seen a lot of those series in on television, pretty much like telling you that the patient is actually on cardiac tamponade. What is cardiac tamponade? Cardiac tamponade is a buildup of blood or other fluid in the pericardial sac. So your sac is actually enclosed. Inside your sac is actually your in between the fibrous pericardium and the heart, the epicardium of the heart. You have a space, the pericardial space that is filled with hyaluronic acid, the pericardial fluid. Now, if something had happened somewhere around the vicinity of the heart, well, if something happens to the heart stops pumping. If something happens to the what do you call this, to outside, this there could be a buildup of blood. If something happens outside, blood could actually get in there, and a fluid buildup within the pericardial sac would increase the pressure inside the sac and could put pressure on the heart and prevent it from pumping effectively. That is actually called cardiac tamponade. What's the treatment to this? Just in case some of you who are going to be EMTs, well, the treatment is the fluid in between there needs to be drawn out of the cavity. Now that's going to be very tricky because imagine if you are not used to doing this particular trick, you're not going to be able to do it. Only a trained hand will be able to do it. A very long syringe will have to go through and make sure that it does not penetrate, go any deeper than where it should be, and then pull out the fluid or whatever blood or fluid, whatever is actually building up there. And that's tricky. So here you are, guys. Let's take a look at the three layers of the heart, as you name it, without looking at the fibrous pericardium. This is your heart. The three layers will be the following. From the outside, don't count this, all right? This is not part of the heart. This is only a fibrous pericardium cover, a sac that covers the heart. It is actually the one that protects the heart. So the first is actually your epicardium. This is the visceral layer of the serous pericardium. Then you have the heart muscle. You call this the myocardium. Then you have your endothelium, your simple squamous epithelium that covers the inside of the heart. That is actually connected and is continuous with the inside lining also of the blood vessel. You call that the endocardium. And this is your heart. And pretty much your heart will have other parts. It is not only the atria, these are your atria, the right atrium, the left atrium, the right ventricle, the left ventricle. Blood goes from the pumping from the lungs. It goes right into the superior vena cava, and what and the the inferior vena cava, and is now going to fill in your right atrium. From the right atrium, it goes through the tricuspid valve and will fill in the right ventricle. The right ventricle contracts and it goes right into the pulmonary valve. No, in, I, no, it did not come from my mistake. So from, let me say that again. Let me say that again. From the tissues, blood comes from the superior end of the body into the superior vena cava, from the inferior end of the body into the inferior vena cava, into the right atrium. And then it goes right into the right ventricle, passing through the tricuspid valve. When the right ventricle contracts, the tricuspid valve will close, and then it will pump the blood into the two lungs. Whoop, whoop, right there. From the lungs, the blood now is going to be oxygenated in the lungs, and it's now going to be, after oxygenation, it's now going to be carried into the left atrium. From the left atrium, when the left atrium contracts, it delivers blood back into the left ventricle, and when going right through the bicuspid valve. This is your bicuspid valve, otherwise known as the mitral valve. Then you have your left ventricle contracting. Once it contracts, it delivers blood into the aorta, going through the aortic semilunar valve. That is your aortic semilunar valve. From the aorta, blood is now delivered to systemically to the different parts of the body. Now, that is the correct way. Let's take a look at the surface features of the heart. The first one that you need to know, and this is actually going to be part of your lab, is actually the coronary sulcus. The coronary sulcus is also known as the atrioventricular groove. So this groove here, okay, and it goes around, it encircles the junction of the atria and the ventricles. That is actually called the coronary sulcus. It's actually going around the heart, going around from here. It starts here, goes behind, and then it goes here. Then you have the anterior interventricular sulcus. Are your ventricles, and there is a groove right here. That is your interior interventricular sulcus. And then behind this, you have a posterior interventricular sulcus in the posterior view of the heart itself. The anterior position, this anterior position of the interventricular septum is actually your anterior interventricular sulcus. You will find here um, fats, it's actually loaded with fats, as well as the coronary artery and also the great cardiac vein right here. So we're going to get into that when we get into the coronary circulation. Now, the posterior interventricular sulcus is actually behind, and it's actually a landmark on the back portion or the posterior surface of the heart. Let me see if the next one is a posterior surface. That, bingo, that's a posterior surface. You have your posterior interventricular sulcus, and you will find that land as a landmark. It is actually loaded with fat, and also it is this is where you find the great cardiac vein and the posterior interventricular arteries. Okay, so we're going to get into that later. Atria, the receiving chambers. These are small, thin-walled chambers. They contribute little to the propulsion of the blood. Why? Because the blood goes in there coming from the big vessels, from the superior vena cava, and pretty much from the ventricle, from at this end. And when as it feels, it doesn't even need to contract. We are bipeds, we're always like standing up, and this is open, so blood doesn't need to be pumped in. It will just be trickling down and will be filling the ventricles from directly from the feel of the atria. The right atrium receives deoxygenated blood, this part here, and um, your left atrium would receive oxygenated blood. The ventricles. The ventricles are discharging chambers, and they will be discharging large amount of blood by contracting. You can see that they are very muscular. They're more muscular than the atria. When they discharge blood with a pressure. This right ventricle would, when they are actually discharging blood, they will be contracting at a force of about 20 millimeters of mercury pressure. This one here will contract and will give a pressure to the aorta, a pressure that is equivalent to about 120 millimeters of mercury pressure, pretty much your left ventricle. That's why your left ventricle, you can see this anatomically, is much thicker than the left ventricle, simply because it contracts with its contractor, force of contraction is actually greater than the force of contraction of the right ventricle. This is 120 millimeters of mercury. This is about, no, I'm not saying 20, probably about 25 millimeters of mercury pressure. So the discharge of your right ventricle goes into the pulmonary trunk, and your left ventricle goes into the aorta. Now, inside, you probably will encounter this in your exam. Is actually the irregular ridges inside the heart. You could see that these are actually what you call the trabeculae carneae. These are irregular ridges of the muscles on the ventricular walls. Then the papillary muscles. These are also very important part which could be asked in your exam. The papillary muscles are those finger-like projections. You could see that. Those are finger-like projections. And they anchor the chorda tendineae. Those things that look like fibrous things that connect to the valves are actually your chorda tendineae. And the chorda tendineae is anchored into the papillary muscles. It keeps the valve from flapping. The heart valves, you have four heart valves. You have two semilunar that looks like half moon. This is one of them, pulmonary semilunar. The other one is the aortic semilunar valve. And two of them is actually your the non-semilunar. These are actually the flapping, but they are not really flapping because they are held down by the chorda tendineae into the papillary muscles. These valves are are pretty much like critical part of the heart. They ensure unidirectional flow of blood in the heart, which means they will make sure that the blood doesn't go back in the opposite direction. They open and close in response to pressure changes. And there are two major types. You have your atrioventricular valves, atrioventricular. So this is an AV valve, atrioventricular valve. This is another AV valve right here. The right AV valve is also known as the tricuspid. The left AV valve is also known as the bicuspid. They are called AV because they guard the opening between your atrium and your ventricle. Then you have the semilunar valves that is located between the ventricle and the large vessels or major arteries. This one here is actually guarding, this is the pulmonary valve. It guards the left, the pulmonary valve guards the right ventricle and the pulmonary trunk. The pulmonary trunk, even if it is color blue, is not a vein. It is an artery. And your other one is called the aortic semilunar valve. This is your aortic semilunar valve. It guards the opening between your left ventricle and your aorta. This valve here, the left AV valve, is also known as the mitral valve. This is a good picture of the chorda tendineae. You can see that this is a real chorda tendineae attached to the tricuspid valve flap. Okay, let's take a look at the function of the AV valve. Blood returning to the heart. There you go, turning to the heart would fill the atria, pressing against the AV valve. The increased pressure forces the AV valve to open, and once open, the blood goes into the ventricles. The ventricles now will fill. As it fills, the AV valve flaps would hang and limp into the ventricles. And when the atria, this one, when it feels that it's already like getting filled with blood, it starts to contract. And when it starts to contract, it forces additional blood into the ventricle, and then it closes. Once this is closed, and this is still closed, it continues to forcefully contract, and this will not open anymore. So it has to open somewhere in order to allow the blood that filled the ventricle to go somewhere. This will open now. The pulmonary valve is now going to open into the pulmonary trunk, and it's going to expel blood into the lungs. So, what did you see there? Well, I saw that the valves were actually able to make sure that the flow of blood is only in one direction. Blood flowed from the atrium into the ventricles, and when the ventricles contracted, this particular AV valve closed and will not allow the blood to go back into the atrium. The blood now will open into the pulmonary trunk. So it allows a unidirectional flow of blood. There you go. Your ventricles now are going to be filled, and once they both contract, they will open both semilunar valves, ejecting blood into the big arteries. So your semilunar valve prevents the backflow of blood from the major arteries back into the ventricles. They open and close in response to pressure changes. Each valve consists of three cusps that roughly resemble a half moon. That's why you call it semilunar valve. The pulmonary semilunar valve is located between the right ventricle and the pulmonary trunk. The aortic semilunar valve is located between the left ventricle and the aorta. There you go. This is how a semilunar valve looks like. It allows blood to go in, but blood, once pressure builds up on the opposite side, it will not go back anymore. There you go. So, this is the pathway of blood through the heart. I would suggest that you memorize this. Where will blood go? Well, where will be their destination? Because you will find this in your first lab exam. No, I think it's in the second practical. The first lab exam is actually on the blood and the lymphatic system and the immune response. The second practical is actually on the heart and the blood vessels, and I think up to the respiratory system. So let's take a look at the pathway of blood. Well, it's actually from the superior vena cava to the inferior vena cava to the coronary sinus to the right atrium, through the tricuspid valve to the right ventricle. Go through this, guys. Okay, go through this and then go through this again. Memorize this. And if there's anything wrong with the pathway, give me a buzz, call me. Okay, so we will know exactly if it is right or wrong. I know that this is supposed to be right. This is actually blood flow to the heart animation. I will make sure I am not going to play this now because it will ruin our recording. So I am going to put this in the references, in the lecture references. And this one here is also for your review. It is the same thing. This is actually your superior vena cava receiving blood, and the blood is right there already. This is oxygen poor blood. It is now in the right atrium. It's now going to trickle down from the right atrium into the right ventricle, right there. But once the ventricle contracts, it's going to open the pulmonary valve. The pulmonary valve will now allow blood, oxygen poor blood, to go into the pulmonary trunk. From the pulmonary trunk, it goes into the capillaries of the lungs, and it's going to pick up oxygen, and it becomes from oxygen poor, it becomes red, it becomes oxygen rich blood. The oxygen rich blood now is going to be delivered back into the pulmonary vein into the left atrium. Once it is in the left atrium, where it is, once it is in the left atrium, uh, from the left atrium, it's now going to be left atrium. It's now going there from here. It's now going to be in the left atrium. From the left atrium, it goes into the left ventricle. From the left ventricle, once it contracts, it's going to be delivered to the aorta, to the different parts of the body. And this is the entire view of the double pump. Now, let's go to coronary circulation. So you think that your brain needs blood, your your lungs need blood, your vital organs, your liver, your kidneys, your spleen needs blood. They all need blood. Blood is needed all over the body. As a matter of fact, your skin is a reservoir of blood. But what about the heart? Your heart is a pumping organ and it carries and it pumps blood. But does it need blood? Of course, it needs blood. The heart is full, pure muscle, and it is working 24/7, 365 days for entire lifetime. It doesn't stop working. It would need a source of uh, nutrient coming from the blood, and a source, most especially the source of oxygen coming from the blood. Of course, you will have to make sure that you feed the muscles of the heart. Feeding the muscles of the heart is now the pathway of the coronary circulation. This is the functional blood supply to the heart muscle itself. It is the shortest circulation in the body because it only feeds our organ, one organ, which is the heart. It is delivered when the heart is relaxed. The left ventricle receives most of the coronary blood supply, which is actually like obvious because it's actually the thickest and would have more muscles and would require more nutrients and oxygen. Now, everything else has is actually a continue. It doesn't mean that it doesn't mean anything, but they colored everything else white in the heart. This is actually heart, but they only highlighted the um, the arteries. This is the coronary arteries of the heart. The coronary arteries of the heart would receive their blood from the aorta. This is your aorta. The first branch of the aorta is actually your left coronary artery. The coronary artery branches into your circumflex artery, okay, and the anterior interventricular artery. And on the right side, you have also, it comes also from the aorta. This is actually your aorta, is actually your right coronary artery. You will have marginal arteries that is actually in branching out or branching off this right coronary artery and your circumflex artery. And They all feed into the heart. Notice that there's actually what you call anastomosis, which means the front is going to continue at the back. Can you see that? Continue at the back, and they will anastomose. In the back, it will anastomose to the front. So even if you develop a blockage right here in the anterior interventricular artery, it doesn't mean that the apex of your heart will not receive any more food or oxygen, because you have a collateral extension, which is actually at the back of the heart, from the posterior interventricular artery, that's going to feed the apex. So it is really very difficult, not unless you are predisposed to formation of atherosclerotic plaque, then you would have some problems, not only in the heart, but in your other vital organs also having cholesterol plaque. So the veins, the veins will pick up oxygen poor blood, and you need to pick up the oxygen poor blood of the heart muscles and replace them with oxygen rich blood. So from the oxygen rich blood, you now pick up the oxygen poor blood, and from all of those blood that you pick up from the great cardiac vein and your anterior what do you call this, from the middle cardiac vein in the front or in the back, this middle cardiac vein and the great cardiac vein and also your small cardiac vein, they all feed into the coronary sinus. This coronary sinus is an enlargement, and you could see it at the back of the heart. That's the reason why it is not really like very visible here, because you're looking at the front of the heart here. This particular coronary sinus is found at the back of the heart, and they empty into the right atrium. The right atrium carries oxygen poor blood, and the coronary sinus carries oxygen poor blood coming from the heart. This is your backside of the heart, and it will show you the coronary sinus. The cardiac muscle. The cardiac muscle is also striated, like your skeletal muscle is striated, but there's a lot of difference between the cardiac muscle uh, and the skeletal muscle. They're both striated, but your skeletal muscle is not branching, it's fibrous. Your cardiac muscle is branched, and they are interconnected. They are actually cells, branching cells. They're interconnected with other branching cells. And right there in their point of connection is actually some sort of a glue that will glue all of those branches. And you call that glue the what do you call this? The intercalated discs. And only the heart muscle will have intercalated disc, and you know that already from your AMP1 histology. The intercalated discs are connecting junctions between heart muscles itself. And there you go. This is actually histology or histological picture of a under probably a high power or maybe a 100x of the heart muscle. And these lines here are actually the intercalated discs. Those lines there are the nuclei, but these lines here that are cross connecting the two fibers of cardiac muscle is your intercalated disc. The heart relies almost exclusively on aerobic respiration. It needs oxygen, period. You cannot put your heart into an anaerobic. You're going to have a heart attack. You'll be dead. So that means only one thing. In the study of the heart cytology, the heart muscle cell, you will find out that the heart muscle cell has more mitochondria than the skeletal muscle. As a matter of fact, it has more mitochondria than any other type of cell. They cannot function without oxygen, and therefore they would need the mitochondria because the mitochondria is the one that produces the oxygen for the body, for the cell. Skeletal muscles can go through fermentation when oxygen is not present, but your heart muscle cannot do that. Both types of tissues can use other fuel sources, but the cardiac muscle's fuel source is only the oxygen. That's actually its best source. Um Lactic acid can also be a good source, but the best source is actually oxygen. You have again your table here showing the key differences between the skeletal muscle and the cardiac muscle. You can review this. This was part of your AMP1. Just make sure that you do that. There could be questions, most especially on the cardiac muscle. That will be all for the first part on the heart. And I will see you on the second part.